I watched Trump's meeting with Zelensky today, so you don't have to, and here's my overview. First off, we'll start with the 3 craziest things he says because they were all insane and I couldn't limit it down, and you'll see why in just a second. First off, he says there's a Democrat senator who wants to build a railroad, no joke, a railroad, from the mainland U.S. to Hawaii. Then he says Putin should have won this war in a week. He should have been able to take Kiev in a week. Straight up pro-Russian propaganda in front of the president of Ukraine. And then finally, the last thing he says in the meeting, and he's talking about Putin, he says he's offered everything. You know why? He doesn't want to fuck around with the United States. Swear to God, out of the president's mouth. They spoke for about 35-40 minutes, and Trump mentioned Biden twice and Barack Obama on 3 separate occasions. He also said that Zelensky looked very beautiful in his jacket. They're still talking about the clothes that he was wearing. And in fact, a reporter will come up again and ask him again about the clothes that he was wearing to meet the president. He's talking about the Middle East, and he says, "We settled the war after thousands of years, I guess. Some people say it's 500 years. Some people say it's 3,000 years. And then he brings that and ties it into Zelensky and Putin and says, but these 2 leaders just don't like each other, so it's going to be more difficult. Ah, yes, the Jews and Arabs in the Middle East, very well known for their great respect and appreciation of each other. Someone asked him about having a trilateral meeting, and this is a direct quote. "In many ways, we will be involved in threes, but it may be separated." There's going to be a lot of direct quotes in here because they don't make a whole lot of sense even with context, but they are direct quotes, so we're going to give them to you. He literally does it again. He gets asked a question from a reporter with an accent who happens to be female, and he says, "Where are you from?" And she says Ukraine, and he says, "Ah, okay." Every single time a female reporter with an accent asks him a question, he says, "Where are you from?" This is not a first time for this. A reporter asks Zelensky, "What's the difference in the leadership between Trump and Biden?" And Zelensky very rightly goes, "Biden isn't president anymore. He can't do anything about this." And then Trump chimes in and says that the difference is one of us is extremely competent and the other one is grossly incompetent. Let's just say him and I may have very differing views on which one is which. Here's another direct quote. "War is really interesting with war and peace, but you don't know." He gets asked a question by a Ukrainian reporter and he says, "You asked that exactly as he wanted you to," implying that Zelensky and this reporter had pre-planned a question that Zelensky had pre-planned for the reporter, and the reporter delivered it exactly as Zelensky had wanted him to, which I don't know why he's making that assumption. He then will say that Melania is doing a bunch with the children of Ukraine, and that she got, 8 kids back or something like that. And then he says that some people say there's 20,000 missing, children in Ukraine that is, and some people say it's maybe 300. Now he's confusing the lie he told about the Biden administration losing 300,000 kids who just went off of DACA and were no longer on the rolls to be found and therefore couldn't be found. And so he says that they were all sex trafficked and kidnapped and murdered, but in fact they were just off of rolls. They were no longer on roll. Anyways, it doesn't really matter. It's all stupid. He implies the war in the Ukraine is the reason that we started studying drone fare, when in fact we've been effectively blowing up weddings in the Middle East with drones for the better part of 3 decades. He calls B-52s stealth bombers, which they are not, but he is just thinking about B-2s. He says that 2020 was rigged and that we've been giving hundreds of billions of dollars to China, but then in his first administration, he took hundreds of billions of dollars from China in tariffs, which isn't a thing. And then he's claiming that in this administration, he's also taking hundreds of billions of dollars from China, which again, isn't a thing. And he says that we basically built the entire Chinese military with the hundreds of billions of dollars that we were just giving them under past presidents, which he was one of them, by the way. Here's a direct quote. "China wants to talk and we like talking to China." Scott Besson says that the export controls China put on their rare earth elements last week was a unprovoked escalation. Now, Donald Trump earlier in this administration put tariffs on China of 145%, which if they work the way that he says that they work, don't make any sense. I've explained this all before. But then Trump says that on November 1st, we're going to make it 150% tariffs on China, just across the board, because that's how he thinks tariffs work. He also says that we never got anything from China, and for decades it was a one-way street. I mean, he sure as hell got all his hats from China, but, whatever. Regarding China, he says before he got into politics, he used to look at how stupid our country was. He then immediately says that the EU and NATO might as well be the same organization because if you look at the countries in both of them, they're very similar. Here's a direct quote with no context. "It's the president, and the president. 3 presidents. I'm the mediator president." Here's a direct quote with context. The context is he really wants a Nobel Prize. "They said if you solve the next one, you're going to get a Nobel Prize. I didn't get a Nobel Prize. Somebody got it who's a very nice woman. I don't know who she is." Here's a direct quote with no context. "To the best of my knowledge, we've never had a president that solved one war." He says that Spain is the only country in NATO who hasn't raised their dues to 5% of their GDP. I'm just going to remind you, no country in NATO gives 5% of their GDP, including the United States of America. We give 3.9%. When talking about the deal that he made in the Middle East, at different points, he will say that 37 countries were involved and that 59 countries were involved. Those two numbers are not even close to each other. In fact, 59 is 59% higher than 37, so I have no idea what he's talking about with that one. Regarding the last boat that he just extrajudicially blew up, which is a war crime, by the way, a reporter asked, hey, weren't there survivors on there? And what about the survivors? What's going to happen to them? Marco Rubio comes out and says, well, we can't give out details on an ongoing investigation. Meanwhile, Trump is just posting videos of these boats getting blown up on True Social, like it's his Call of Duty replay. And then he says, it happened to be a submarine. I don't know too many people who own submarines. Now he finally addresses what happened in Alaska with thousands of natives being displaced and multiple dead, many more still. Just kidding, he doesn't. He says, they just built a nice road in Alaska that's going to get us a lot of minerals. He then asks Zelensky, how would you feel about us building a tunnel between Russia, you know, your enemy that you're currently at war with, and Alaska, you know, our state that borders up against that enemy? Zelensky says he wouldn't be very happy about it. No surprise there. Here's a direct quote with no context. The cold and the heat and all things take place in war. Finally, he says the Dems want to spend $1.5 trillion on people who invaded our country. And then he gets asked, did you approve CIA operations in Venezuela? And he says, I wouldn't say that. That wasn't actually the last thing he said, because as I told you at the beginning, the last thing he said was in regards to Putin, and he said he offered everything. You know why? He doesn't want to fuck around with the United States. Just a reminder, every video you find on TikTok, I also post for free on YouTube, Instagram, Patreon, and Substack. I also have subscription options available on Patreon and Substack, also on TikTok for videos which are additional content, if you so choose that you would like to get additional content from me. All of that being said, please show up tomorrow for No King's Day. It's very important. I have some people to thank. This person says, thanks for your great content. I appreciate all the hard work so I don't actually have to listen to our loser president speak. Keep up the good work, from Elizabeth M. They sent me a gift card. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that. This person says, enjoy this book. I love the wisdom of the Stoics, and I hope you do too. Thanks for keeping it real, from Lisa C. in Mesa, Arizona. Lisa sent Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I have not read any of the Stoics, so I'm excited to read that book and all of the books that you guys have sent. I'm finishing the Mistborn series now, and then I have some other ones that I have planned to read. I have read a couple of the ones you guys did. I may do book reviews at some point. I know a lot of you want to go over the bookshelves. I'll do it at some point, okay? There's a lot going on, and I'm trying to build an entire platform here, so I hope you enjoy. Love you guys. Thank you for sticking around. Okay, thanks. Bye.